The biggest mistake Olivia Parker ever made lasted less than 10 seconds, and by the time she realized it, the opportunity was already walking away. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's annual salaries. Soft jazz floated through the air while hundreds of young professionals, executives, and entrepreneurs moved between cocktail tables, exchanging business cards and carefully rehearsed smiles. Olivia Parker adjusted the sleeve of her navy blazer and glanced around the crowded networking event. At 27, she had built a reputation for reading people quickly. Too quickly, some would say. But in her experience, first impressions usually told the truth. Confidence mattered. Ambition mattered. Direction mattered. She had spent years climbing her way out of a childhood where money was always tight, where every utility bill felt like a family emergency. She promised herself long ago that she would never attach her future to someone who lacked purpose. Across the room, a familiar colleague waved her over. "Olivia, there's someone I want you to meet." She followed him toward a quieter corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. Standing alone beside the glass was a man who looked entirely out of place among the luxury watches and tailored suits. He wore a simple charcoal sweater, dark jeans, and a pair of well-worn brown shoes. No designer logo. No expensive accessories. No attempt to impress anyone. His hands rested calmly in his pockets as he watched the city lights below. "Olivia, this is Ethan." Ethan turned and offered a small smile. "Nice to meet you." His voice was steady, quiet, the kind that didn't compete with the room. Olivia shook his hand politely. "Nice to meet you too." For a moment, silence settled between them. Ethan seemed perfectly comfortable with it. Olivia was not. Most men at events like this rushed to list accomplishments within 30 seconds. They talked about startups, investments, promotions, and future plans. Ethan simply asked, "Are you enjoying the evening?" "It's productive," Olivia replied. "I've made some great connections." Ethan nodded. "That's good." Another pause. Olivia waited for more. Nothing came. She noticed his relaxed posture, his ordinary clothes, the complete lack of urgency in his demeanor. In her mind, conclusions began forming. Maybe he was someone's guest. Maybe he worked in a support role. Maybe he simply didn't have much going on. Whatever the reason, she felt the conversation drifting nowhere. "Well," she said with a courteous smile, "it was nice meeting you." Ethan returned the smile. "You too." She hesitated before adding, "You seem like a good person, Ethan. I just think we're probably looking for different things." There was no cruelty in her words. No intention to hurt him. Just a quiet dismissal wrapped in politeness. Ethan studied her for a second, as if he understood exactly what she meant. Then he nodded once. Maybe. No argument. No attempt to change her mind. No explanation. He simply stepped aside and allowed her to continue through the crowd. Olivia walked away feeling certain of her judgment. Behind her, Ethan turned back toward the glass and the endless sea of lights stretching beyond the Hudson River. Neither of them noticed the CEO of a Fortune 500 company crossing the ballroom with an expression of genuine excitement after spotting Ethan from across the room. Neither of them knew that within the next 72 hours, that brief conversation would replay in Olivia's mind more times than she could count. And neither of them knew that the quiet man standing alone by the window was worth billions of dollars, yet considered that fact the least interesting thing about himself. The following Monday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of deadlines, emails, and back-to-back meetings. Olivia Parker sat at her desk on the 22nd floor of Harper Strategic Events, reviewing proposals while the Manhattan skyline glowed beneath a pale spring sun. The networking event was already fading into memory. To her, Ethan had been one more face among hundreds. One more brief conversation that led nowhere. By 10 o'clock, her attention had shifted entirely to a major business summit her firm was helping organize. It was the largest project of the year, attracting executives, investors, and industry leaders from across the country. The pressure was enormous. The opportunity was even bigger. "Do we have final confirmation from the keynote speaker?" Olivia asked during a planning meeting. Her supervisor nodded. "Not yet. His office keeps everything private until the last minute." "Who is he?" someone asked. "Apparently one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the country." Several people exchanged curious glances. "What industry?" "Technology, renewable energy, real estate." Honestly, Nobody seems completely sure anymore. Laughter filled the conference room. The mystery only added to the excitement. Over the next 2 days, preparations intensified. Vendors called nonstop. Schedules changed by the hour. Olivia barely had time to think about anything else. Then something unusual happened. Wednesday afternoon, while walking through the convention center during setup, she spotted a familiar figure standing near an unfinished registration area. Ethan. He wore the same simple style. Dark sweater. Plain slacks. Nothing remarkable. He appeared to be studying a floor plan mounted on a temporary wall. Olivia slowed her pace. For a moment, she wondered if he worked for one of the vendors. Maybe logistics. Maybe technical support. Before she could decide whether to say hello, a staff member approached him carrying a tablet. The young man seemed nervous. Very nervous. Ethan listened quietly as the employee explained something. Then he smiled and pointed toward a section of the floor plan. The employee's shoulders immediately relaxed. A few seconds later, they shook hands. Ethan continued walking. Olivia watched him disappear around a corner. Strange, she thought. There was something about the way people reacted around him. Not fear. Not pressure. Respect. Yet nothing about him suggested authority. By Thursday morning, the convention center had transformed. Massive LED screens stretched across the main stage. Rows of seats filled the enormous hall. Attendees arrived carrying badges, coffee cups, and ambitious dreams. Olivia moved through the crowd with practiced confidence, solving problems before they became visible. Shortly before lunch, she entered a restricted executive lounge to deliver updated schedules. As she stepped inside, conversation filled the room. Investors discussed acquisitions. CEOs exchanged market forecasts. Then she noticed Ethan again. This time he stood alone near a coffee station. Olivia almost laughed at the coincidence. 3 encounters in less than a week. She watched as a security officer approached him. The officer spoke quietly. Ethan nodded and followed him toward the exit. Olivia felt an unexpected sense of validation. There it is, she thought. Maybe he had wandered into an area reserved for executives. Maybe someone had finally noticed he did not belong there. The assumption settled comfortably in her mind. It fit the story she had already created. Yet as Ethan reached the doorway, something unexpected happened. One of the most recognizable business leaders in America suddenly stood up from a nearby table. Ethan, the man called out with genuine enthusiasm. Every conversation in the room seemed to pause for a fraction of a second. Ethan turned. The executive crossed the room immediately and extended both hands with a smile that looked less like professional courtesy and more like admiration. Olivia froze. She knew exactly who that executive was. Everyone did. And for reasons she could not explain, he was treating the quiet man in the charcoal sweater as if he were the most important person in the room. Olivia remained frozen near the doorway long after the conversation resumed around her. The executive who had crossed the room was Richard Callaway, founder of one of the largest investment firms in the country. She had seen him featured on magazine covers, interviewed on national television, and quoted in business journals for years. People did not casually walk up to Richard Callaway. They waited weeks for meetings. They competed for introductions. Yet there he was smiling like an old friend. Ethan shook his hand and exchanged a few quiet words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that demanded attention. If anything, Ethan seemed slightly uncomfortable with the spotlight. A moment later, another executive approached. Then another. Within minutes, a small circle had formed around him. Olivia watched from across the room, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The picture refused to fit together. The simple clothes, the calm demeanor, the complete absence of self-promotion. None of it matched the way influential people were reacting to him. Olivia, a voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find her coworker Jenna carrying a stack of schedules. What are you staring at? Olivia glanced back toward Ethan. Who is that guy? Jenna followed her gaze. Which one? The one standing with Callaway. Jenna squinted. No idea. What? I have seen him 3 times this week. Jenna shrugged. Maybe he works with one of the sponsors. That explanation sounded reasonable enough. Olivia nodded and returned to work, but the question lingered. Throughout the afternoon, she kept noticing Ethan in different parts of the convention center. He never seemed rushed, never seemed stressed. While everyone else hurried from meeting to meeting, he moved at an entirely different pace. At one point, she passed a conference room where a heated discussion appeared to be taking place among several senior executives. Through the glass wall, She noticed Ethan sitting quietly at the end of the table. He was not speaking. He was simply listening. 10 minutes later, the same executives emerged looking noticeably calmer. One of them even laughed. Somehow the atmosphere had completely changed. Olivia found herself becoming curious despite her best efforts not to be. Late that afternoon, she stepped into a coffee shop connected to the convention center. The line stretched almost to the entrance. As she waited, she spotted Ethan sitting alone near a window. No assistants. No entourage. No laptop covered in company stickers. Just a paper cup of coffee and a notebook. He was writing something by hand. The scene felt strangely ordinary, almost peaceful. Before she could stop herself, Olivia considered walking over. Maybe she had misjudged him. Maybe there was more to the story. Then another thought arrived immediately afterward. If there was more to the story, why had he never said so? Most people would have found a way to mention impressive connections. Most people would have highlighted their accomplishments. Ethan had done the opposite. He seemed content letting assumptions exist. The thought irritated her more than it should have. As she collected her coffee and headed back toward the convention hall, a giant digital banner above the main entrance suddenly flashed with an announcement. Attention attendees. Friday morning keynote will begin at 9 o'clock sharp. Special introduction to follow. Excitement rippled through the crowd. Conversations immediately shifted toward speculation. Who was the keynote speaker? Why all the secrecy? Olivia glanced around the bustling convention center one more time. Across the lobby, Ethan stepped into an elevator and disappeared behind closing doors. For reasons she could not explain, she watched until the numbers above the elevator stopped changing. Then she shook her head and walked away. The last thing she expected was that less than 24 hours later, the entire convention center would be standing on its feet because of the same quiet man she still believed was simply connected to the right people. Friday morning arrived beneath a sky the color of polished steel. By 8:30, the main convention hall was already overflowing. Thousands of attendees filled the seats while late arrivals lined the walls near the back. The giant screens on either side of the stage displayed only the event logo and a simple message. Please take your seats. The anticipation was almost tangible. Olivia moved through the aisles with a tablet in hand, helping coordinate final details before the keynote session began. Everywhere she went, people were talking about the mystery speaker. Names floated through the crowd like stock prices. Famous founders, venture capital legends, media personalities. Nobody seemed certain. At exactly 9 o'clock, the house lights dimmed. Conversations faded into silence. A spotlight illuminated the center of the stage as the master of ceremonies stepped forward. The audience responded with polite applause. Olivia stopped near the side entrance, grateful for a brief moment to catch her breath. The host welcomed everyone, thanked the sponsors, and spoke about innovation, leadership, and the future. Then his tone shifted. Our keynote speaker requested something unusual, he said. No promotional campaign. No advance interviews. No public announcement. He believes ideas should arrive before reputation. A few people laughed softly. Others exchanged confused looks. The host smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of Horizon Dynamics, chairman of the Blackwell Foundation, and one of the most influential entrepreneurs of the last decade. The enormous screens behind him came alive. A single name appeared. Ethan Blackwell. For a second, Olivia thought she had read it wrong. The room exploded into applause. Thousands of people rose to their feet. The sound rolled across the hall like thunder. Olivia felt her stomach drop. From the side of the stage, a familiar figure emerged. The same charcoal sweater. The same calm expression. The same quiet man she had dismissed only days earlier. Ethan walked to center stage without any sign of excitement. He waved once, almost shyly, and waited for the applause to settle. It took nearly a full minute. Olivia could barely move. Around her, attendees were speaking in astonished whispers. That is Ethan Blackwell. I thought he would arrive with security. He looks completely different from what I expected. Olivia stared at the giant screens displaying his achievements. Horizon Dynamics. Valuation exceeding $40 billion. Renewable energy initiatives across 3 continents. Educational programs serving thousands of students. Humanitarian projects in dozens of communities. The list continued. Each new accomplishment felt heavier than the last. Yet the man standing on stage looked exactly the same as he had beside the ballroom window. Ethan stepped toward the microphone. The room immediately became silent. "Thank you," he said. His voice remained calm, steady, familiar. "I know many people expected someone else." Laughter rippled through the audience. Even Ethan smiled. "That happens more often than you might think." More laughter followed. Then his expression softened. "People spend a lot of time trying to appear successful. I spent years trying to understand what success actually means." Olivia listened as every memory from their brief conversation replayed inside her mind. She remembered his quiet confidence, his comfort with silence, his complete lack of interest in impressing anyone. Suddenly, every detail made sense. What she had mistaken for a lack of ambition had actually been something far rarer. Security. The kind that did not need validation. The kind that did not announce itself. As Ethan continued speaking, Olivia realized the most surprising part was not that he was wealthy. It was that he had never once acted like someone who needed the world to know. When the keynote session ended, the audience remained standing long after Ethan left the stage. Conversations erupted throughout the convention center. Some people discussed his companies. Others talked about his investments. But the most common reaction was surprisingly simple. Nobody could believe how ordinary he seemed. Olivia stood near the back of the hall, watching attendees gather around giant display screens featuring highlights from Ethan's career. The numbers were staggering. Multi-billion-dollar ventures, national innovation awards, philanthropic programs operating across dozens of cities. Yet none of those accomplishments unsettled her as much as one simple fact. She had looked directly at him and failed to see him. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Everywhere she went, Ethan's name followed her. Speakers quoted him. Investors referenced his ideas. Young entrepreneurs repeated lines from his presentation as if they were personal mantras. By late afternoon, Olivia found herself standing in front of a digital exhibit showcasing the Blackwell Foundation. Curious, she began reading. The foundation funded scholarships for first-generation college students. It supported vocational training programs. It invested in struggling communities that larger organizations often ignored. One story caught her attention. A student from rural Ohio had become an engineer after receiving support from the foundation. Another featured a single mother who launched a successful small business after completing one of its programs. There were dozens more. Hundreds, perhaps. None of the stories focused on Ethan himself. His name appeared only in small print at the bottom. The spotlight remained on the people whose lives had changed. Olivia felt an uncomfortable knot forming in her chest. She thought back to the networking event, back to the moment she had quietly dismissed him. At the time, she believed she was evaluating ambition. Now she wondered whether she had been measuring something far more superficial. Later that evening, a reception was held for executives and sponsors. Olivia attended as part of her responsibilities. The ballroom glowed beneath warm lights while a string quartet played softly near the entrance. She moved through the crowd exchanging polite greetings, but her attention kept drifting toward a small group gathered near one side of the room. Ethan stood there speaking with several young founders. Unlike many influential people Olivia had met, he was not dominating the conversation. He spent most of his time listening. Occasionally he asked a question. Occasionally he smiled. The others seemed completely engaged. At one point, a nervous entrepreneur accidentally spilled a drink onto the edge of a table while speaking with him. The young man's face turned bright red. Ethan simply handed him a napkin and continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. No embarrassment. No judgment. Just kindness. Olivia watched from across the room. The more she observed him, the more confused she became. Wealth explained the headlines. It explained the companies and the recognition. It did not explain the calmness. It did not explain the humility. It certainly did not explain why someone with every reason to seek attention appeared so determined to avoid it. For the first time since their brief introduction, Olivia found herself wishing she had asked different questions. Not about success. Not about status. About him. The actual person. Because the more she learned, the more she suspected that the most valuable thing Ethan Blackwell possessed had never appeared on any balance sheet at all. The reception slowly began to wind down, but Olivia remained near the edge of the ballroom long after. Many guests had left. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered beneath the night sky. Inside, servers cleared tables while clusters of attendees exchanged final handshakes before heading home. Ethan was still there, not at the center of attention, not surrounded by cameras. Simply talking with people one conversation at a time. The contrast fascinated her. Most successful individuals she had encountered spent enormous energy building an image. Ethan seemed to spend equal energy avoiding one. As the evening progressed, Olivia noticed something else. People approached him constantly, yet almost none of the conversations centered on business. A young founder thanked him for advice he had received years earlier. A nonprofit director expressed gratitude for support that had kept a community program alive. A college student spoke about a scholarship that had changed her future. Each interaction carried the same pattern. Ethan listened carefully. He remembered names. He asked follow-up questions. He treated every person as if they mattered. Around 9 o'clock, Olivia stepped outside the ballroom to deliver some final paperwork to the event operations office. The corridor was nearly empty. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she reviewed a checklist on her tablet. Turning a corner, she unexpectedly found herself face-to-face with Ethan. For a brief moment, both stopped. The hallway suddenly felt much quieter than it should have. "Olivia," Ethan said with a small smile. He remembered her name. Somehow that surprised her more than it should have. "Hi." She hesitated. "Congratulations on the keynote." Ethan gave a modest shrug. "Thank you." An awkward silence followed. Not because Ethan seemed uncomfortable, because Olivia did. She remembered every assumption she had made, every conclusion she had reached without evidence. Ethan appeared completely unaware of the internal battle taking place behind her expression. Or perhaps he was aware and simply chose not to mention it. "Your presentation was impressive," she said finally. "I learned a lot. I'm glad it was useful." Again, nothing boastful. Nothing designed to impress. Just a sincere response. Olivia studied him for a second. The same calm eyes. The same quiet confidence. Yet now she understood how much she had failed to notice before. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why do you keep everything so private?" Ethan glanced toward the window at the end of the corridor. City lights reflected softly across the glass. For a moment, he seemed to consider the question carefully. "Because attention changes the way people see you," he replied. "Sometimes it changes the way you see yourself too." Olivia remained silent. Ethan continued. "When people know certain things about you, they often stop looking any deeper." The words landed with surprising weight. Not accusatory, not bitter, just honest. Before she could respond, a member of the event staff approached and asked Ethan a question about transportation. He answered politely and turned back toward Olivia. "It was good seeing you again." Then he smiled and walked away. Olivia stood alone in the hallway long after he disappeared around the corner. For the first time, she began to suspect that the mistake she had made was larger than a wrong first impression. The real mistake was believing that success always looked a certain way. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized Ethan Blackwell might have been testing nothing at all. He had simply shown up as himself. Everyone else had supplied the assumptions. The convention ended the following afternoon, but Ethan's words remained with Olivia long after the final attendees departed. During the drive home, she found herself replaying every conversation they had shared. There had only been a few. None lasted more than a couple of minutes. Yet each memory now carried a different meaning. By Monday morning, normal life had resumed. Emails filled her inbox. Meetings occupied her calendar. Deadlines demanded attention. Still, something had changed. For the first time in years, Olivia found herself questioning the assumptions she usually trusted without hesitation. Late that afternoon, while reviewing proposals in her office, she received an unexpected message from Jenna. Attached was a link to a recent interview Ethan had given several years earlier. Curious, Olivia opened it. The article was not about business acquisitions or financial success. It focused on leadership. One quote immediately caught her attention. "Success becomes dangerous when it convinces you that appearances are facts." Olivia read the sentence twice, then a third time. The irony was impossible to ignore. As she continued reading, another detail stood out. According to the article, Ethan often attended events anonymously, not as an experiment, not to test people, simply because he preferred genuine interactions. He believed titles entered conversations too early and prevented people from meeting each other honestly. Olivia leaned back in her chair and stared at the city outside her office window. The realization brought a strange mixture of embarrassment and admiration. She had spent years believing she was an excellent judge of character. Yet she had barely given Ethan a chance to reveal any character at all. Several weeks passed. Summer slowly settled over Manhattan. One warm evening, Olivia attended a community fundraising event hosted at a renovated public library in Brooklyn. Her company had helped coordinate logistics, and she planned to stay only long enough to greet a few sponsors. The event itself was modest compared to the convention. No giant screens, no luxury ballroom, no celebrity speakers, just local leaders, volunteers, educators, and families gathering to support literacy programs. Olivia was speaking with one of the organizers when she noticed a familiar voice nearby. She turned. Ethan stood beside a group of middle school students helping arrange donated books on a table. He wore a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. No photographers surrounded him. No media representatives followed him. Most people in the room appeared completely unaware of who he was. The students certainly did not care. They only seemed excited that an adult was helping them unpack boxes. Olivia watched from a distance. One young boy proudly showed Ethan a stack of science books he had organized. Ethan listened as if he were receiving an important presentation from a board chairman. The boy finished speaking. Ethan smiled and offered a sincere compliment. The child's face immediately brightened. It was such a small moment, yet it revealed more about Ethan than any financial report ever could. Before she realized what she was doing, Olivia found herself walking toward him. This time there were no assumptions waiting ahead of the conversation. No conclusions already written. Just curiosity. And for the first time since they met, she felt ready to learn who Ethan Blackwell actually was. Olivia stopped a few feet away and waited until the students finished gathering their books. One by one, they thanked Ethan and hurried toward the refreshment tables, leaving the two of them standing beside a shelf filled with donated novels and science textbooks. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the community event drifted softly through the library. Children laughed near the reading corner. Volunteers carried boxes between tables. Somewhere in the background, a piano melody floated through the room. Ethan smiled first. "Good to see you again, Olivia." This time, she smiled back without hesitation. "You too." The conversation felt different from every interaction they had shared before. Not because Ethan had changed, because she had. There were no assumptions competing for space in her mind. No invisible scorecard measuring success. Just curiosity. Real curiosity. "I did not expect to find you here," she admitted. Ethan glanced around the room. "This is one of my favorite projects." The literacy program? The people? His answer arrived so naturally that Olivia almost missed it. Ethan looked toward a group of children gathering around a volunteer storyteller. "Programs matter," he said. "Funding matters. But people are always the reason." Olivia followed his gaze. The children were completely absorbed in the story unfolding before them. Their faces glowed with excitement. "You spend a lot of time doing this?" she asked. "Whenever I can." He smiled. "Business is important. But eventually every accomplishment becomes a line on a report. Helping someone changes an actual life." Olivia remained quiet. The simplicity of the statement carried more weight than many speeches she had heard from executives twice Ethan's age. After a moment, she took a slow breath. "Can I be honest about something?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." Olivia looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. "When we first met, I made assumptions about you." Ethan's expression remained calm. Not surprised. Not offended. Just attentive. "I know." The honesty caught her off guard. "You knew?" A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Most people think they are hiding their assumptions better than they actually are. Olivia laughed softly despite herself. "That is fair." The silence that followed felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, she said the words she had been carrying for weeks. "I am sorry." Ethan studied her for a second. Then he shook his head gently. "You do not owe me an apology." "I think I do." "Why?" Olivia hesitated. "Because I decided who you were before I knew anything about you." Ethan glanced toward the window where the last light of evening painted the glass with shades of gold. "The truth is, everyone does that sometimes. Not like I did." He looked back at her. "Maybe. But the important part is what happens after you realize it." Olivia considered his answer carefully. There was no bitterness in his voice. No desire to prove a point. Only perspective. And suddenly she understood something she had missed from the very beginning. Ethan's confidence did not come from wealth. It came from knowing exactly who he was. As volunteers began stacking chairs around the room, Olivia noticed the event was winding down. Yet for the first time since meeting Ethan, she felt as though the real conversation was only beginning. The months that followed unfolded quietly. There were no dramatic announcements, no grand gestures, no sudden transformation worthy of a headline. Instead, something much rarer happened. Olivia and Ethan simply got to know each other. They met for coffee in small neighborhood cafes where nobody recognized him. They walked through bookstores and spent entire afternoons discussing ideas rather than accomplishments. Sometimes they disagreed. Sometimes they laughed. Often they listened. And little by little, Olivia discovered that the most remarkable thing about Ethan had never been his success. It was his perspective. One crisp October evening, nearly 6 months after the literacy event, they sat on a bench overlooking the Hudson River. The city lights shimmered across the water while ferries moved slowly through the darkness. A cool breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt familiar now, comfortable. Olivia smiled as she looked out at the skyline. You know, if someone had told me a year ago that I would enjoy sitting quietly for 20 minutes, I would have laughed. Ethan chuckled softly. You used to be afraid of silence. I was. She glanced at him. I thought silence meant there was nothing interesting to say. And now? Olivia thought for a moment. Now I think silence usually means nobody is trying to prove anything. Ethan smiled, but said nothing. The answer seemed to please him. The river reflected scattered points of light, like stars floating on the surface. Olivia leaned back against the bench and shook her head. You know what is strange? What? When I first met you, I thought I understood exactly who you were. Ethan laughed quietly. That makes one of us. She turned toward him. What does that mean? When I first met you, I thought you were ambitious. Olivia raised an eyebrow. I was. You were. But that was not the most important thing about you. She looked at him curiously. What was? Ethan's expression softened. Your willingness to change your mind. The answer caught her off guard. Of all the compliments she expected, that was not one of them. Most people protect their first impression, he continued, even when they know it was wrong. You did not. Olivia looked down at her hands. The memory of that networking event still made her smile and cringe at the same time. I almost did, she admitted. Then I would have missed out on knowing a good person. For a moment, neither looked away. Around them, the city continued moving. Cars crossed bridges. Office towers glowed against the night sky. Thousands of stores